I am a licensed funeral director slash embalmer, AMA, as read and seen on Reddit. All right. Question, how did you get into your line of work? As a kid, I was always the one who would go up to the casket and poke around and try and figure out how the body got so cold and stiff. That's morbid, I know, but it's true. When everyone else was applying to colleges, I was researching how to be a funeral director. 2 years of college, a national board exam, a residency, and a state law exam, and now here I am. No family in the business or anything. What made you choose this line of work? Do you not get freaked out working with a dead body? I have no idea. I always had sort of a strange curiosity about death and what happens when someone dies and how the embalming process worked. When I got out of high school, I didn't know what else to do, so I gave it a shot. It's only 2 years of college. I love it now, but creeped out? Not creeped out. Sometimes I get grossed out. I've had to leave the room a few times, but the smells can get overwhelming. How realistic is 6 feet under when it comes to embalming post-mortem practices? I've always wanted to do this for work. 6 feet under was ridiculously accurate in my opinion. I mean, dealing with families involves a lot more interaction, but overall, I'd say they did a great job. Do it, it's a rewarding job. Question, what are the rules of etiquette in your profession if a member of your family dies? Do you embalm them or have someone else embalm them? It's up to the director. Personally, I don't think I would be able to embalm a close family member like my mom or sister. Some funeral directors insist on doing it themselves to make sure it's done right and no corners are cut. It's a matter of personal choice. How long can you expect a body to remain preserved once embalmed? It depends on how well someone is embalmed. If someone is well embalmed, they can stay preserved for years. If not, you'll start to see decomp within a day or so. What did you have to learn in embalming school to be good at what you do? Like learn how to reconstruct faces from photos, etc.? School taught me hardly anything. We would practice embalming on cadavers, but they were horribly decomposed and moldy, and nothing at all like embalming under normal circumstances. We made different facial features out of wax for restorative art class, but we never had to apply them to anything. When I graduated, I had no clue what I was doing. I learned embalming and reconstructing from doing it once I got a job. New York school's main goals are basically to get you to pass the national board exam, and that's it. You know a whole bunch of technical terms when you graduate, but that's it. Question, what's the worst thing a family can do when having a funeral? I recently went to one that ended with everyone throwing glitter in the air. I can only imagine how much of a pain that was to get out of the carpet before the next family arrived. Did you have to take classes on grief counseling? If not, how did you learn to interact with grieving families? Did your boss teach you? Is it instinct? Thanks. We get people sneaking beer into the funeral home a lot. That's about the worst for me. And gum. I hate removing gum from the carpet. Other than that, I let people do whatever they want. I had one GC class, but it wasn't much help. I learned from sitting in on arrangements with licensed directors. Before I did anything alone, I kind of got briefing on what not to say to grieving people. It's all hands-on experience. Question, do you listen to music while you work? If so, what kind? If I know I'm going to be a while, then I put my iPod on. I listen to stuff that's easy for me to get lost in, like Brand New and Title Fight. Question, is embalming necessary? Nope, some places will require with an open casket, but if it's closed, it certainly isn't a law. At least not in New York. Question, is the pay decent? Yep, starting pay for me was $45 a year. My manager makes over $100,000, plus he has a company car, a company cell phone, and full benefits. Question, how hard is it to get precious metals from the teeth? Do people request it? Once, and only once, we couldn't extract the tooth, so the family had the guy cremated. The gold didn't melt, it just warped, so they sifted through his ashes and took the gold out. Normally we don't do that though. It could be considered excessive mutilation. Do you handle pet remains for cremation? Explain. We sell pet urns and pet keepsakes, but we don't cremate pets. In New York, it's illegal to be both a funeral home and a crematory. If a family comes on for a pet, I refer them to a pet crematory instead. Favorite shrimp recipe? Coconut shrimp forever. Without going to specifics, can you talk about the hardest reconstruction process you've undertaken? Sure, a guy got hit by a car and smashed his head up pretty bad. He had some broken bones in his face, a half-shaved head, and his scalp was in 3 different places. And weirdest request you've ever received from family? A family once asked me if I could clip grandma's toenails and save them in a Ziploc bag. Ever seen a fight break out during a funeral session? Yep. A few times. Once was a cat fight outside the funeral home. Another was between a father and a son because the son and his friends brought their motorcycles into the funeral procession and wouldn't stop doing wheelies behind the limo. And what's the weirdest way someone has died that you've embalmed? We had a guy who passed away on 9/11. His family didn't claim his remains until 2011, and there was only 11 parts of him found. The largest was half of a femur. And do people really come in with grins stuck on their faces? If so, how do you fix it? No, but I've seen people with awful scowls. It can be hard to fix, but you do it with massaging the face and setting the features. What do you do to fix a traumatic injury, like caved in head or missing skin? Mortuary wax. It's my favorite invention in the whole world. It's a flesh-tone putty-like substance that's super easy to cosmetize over. I use it for most things, affixing hair to the skin and covering burns and sutures, covering small holes. For bigger holes, we use a basket weave suture and then cover that with mortuary wax. What exactly is embalming? My granddad just died 2 weeks ago and he was very healthy and took a heart attack. He had slight cuts and bruising on his forehead. He was 66. What embalming would you have done for him? Also, I noticed like a padding on his chest under his clothing. Was that something to do with the autopsy? Well, first, embalming involves the injection of embalming fluid into the arterial system. As the fluid is injected into the arteries, blood is drained via the body's corresponding vein. The purpose is to delay composition. The padding was mostly likely cotton. The medical examiner or coroner makes a Y-shaped incision on the torso during the autopsy, which we have to close and cover. After we suture the incision, we put cotton over it to prevent any blood from leaking into the clothing and staining it. They probably just used a little too much cotton. What was your favorite dead person to embalm? Autopsied bodies are always my favorite. They're fun for me. They're very complex. I think I like them so much because they really force you to understand how complex the body is. You can get such a better understanding of how certain blood vessels work, and I find it so intriguing. Does your job ever make you sad? Sometimes, but it's rare. I never feel bad for the deceased, though. They're dead. They don't know what happened to them. They can't feel anymore. I feel bad for the people left behind. They're the ones that can get to me. Recently graduated pathologist, MD. What specifically do you have to fix when we autopsy a body? What happens with the bag of organs? What happens if we cut the internal carotids flush with the skull when removing the brain? We have to open up the chest cavity and treat the organs. That involves placing them in a cavity fluid, which is basically a really strong formaldehyde mixture. I think what happens to the organs varies. Here in New York, we just place the bag into the torso. Like, we don't put the organs in their designated spot. We just throw the bag in and mush it down. But in Illinois, they take the organs out of the bag, put them in the layer with them in absorbent sawdust like powder. They call it making lasagna. We've never had anyone cut the carotids that short. You have to go out of your way to do that. When they do cut a little short, you have to dig them a little for them. By fix, I mean, with the ME sutures, they do it loosely. I'm assuming because A, they know we have to open the sutures, and B, tight sutures takes time. We don't want leaking, so when we're done, we really want tight sutures. Autopsies take forever, but they're interesting to me. The human body is phenomenal. Has there ever been a funeral where no one shows up? Only once. It's more common for 1 or 2 to show up, but even that is rare. My ex was licensed as a funeral director and embalmer, although he no longer worked in the industry. Walking down the street, he'd look at people and say, "She's definitely a 5 point," or "That guy's a 1 point, no problem," referring to how many injection points of embalming fluid he'd need. Do y'all really think like that? We actually do think like that, and sometimes I even think about random people like, oh, hey, they would be like great to embalm. What would your advice be for the general population regarding preparing for your own or loved one's funeral that people don't think about before until it's too late? Pre-planning a funeral is probably the most helpful thing you can do for your family. Whether it be your own funeral or a loved one's, you don't even have to put money down to do it. It makes things so much easier. At least get things down on paper. In New York State, you need certain info for the death certificate, like mother's maiden name and city, state of birth. A lot of people don't even know that stuff about their family. Oh, and also bring underwear. Whenever people bring in clothes for the deceased, I'd say 70% do not bring underwear, and they need it. How emotionally harder is it to work with kids? So much harder. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have a huge gap between ages. It goes from stillborn to 17. So where I work, any kid we've gotten between those ages came in when I had my day off. But the first time I ever dealt with someone who lost a stillborn, it was rough. The woman still had a bit of pregnancy belly, and the entire time she just couldn't stop silently crying. She legitimately looked like she would never be happy again, and it broke my heart. I cried for like 2 days. Sorry to be a bit descriptive, but funeral directors have souls too. People think, like, we're just numb, but not always.